A reserved man hired a stunning Navajo woman as his cook. A week later, John lived alone on the edge of a quiet town. His small house sat at the end of a narrow lane, surrounded by tall trees that swayed gently with the wind. Most days he would wake early, make himself a simple breakfast and walk to work. He enjoyed his life of routine. There was comfort in knowing what to expect each day. John liked his peace, his quiet, and the silence that filled his house. He did not have many friends and he didn't need many. But sometimes when he returned home after a long day, the walls seemed colder than usual. The kitchen, in particular, felt empty. Cooking for himself every day had become a chore. The meals were simple, often repetitive, and no matter how much he tried, he couldn't make them taste right. One morning, John decided it was time to hire a cook. He had thought about it for weeks, thinking about someone who could bring life to his kitchen, someone who could make his home smell warm and inviting again. He placed an advertisement in the local paper. It was short and straightforward. Cook wanted, experience preferred. Small household, reliable. John didn't expect much. He thought perhaps a local woman or a young person looking for extra work might answer. He certainly didn't expect to meet someone like Iana. Gianna arrived on a bright Thursday morning. The sun had just risen, casting a golden glow across the trees outside John's house. When she knocked on the door, John opened it and froze for a moment. She was unlike anyone he had met before. She was tall and graceful, with long, dark hair braided neatly over her shoulder. Her eyes held a quiet strength, and her smile was gentle but confident. There was something calm and natural about her, something that immediately made the house feel warmer. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice even and welcoming. "Good morning," John replied a little awkwardly. He stepped aside to let her in. He had expected someone practical, perhaps older, someone who would focus on the work and not on conversation. But Ayana seemed calm and self-assured, like she belonged there, like she had always been part of this quiet house. As she looked around the kitchen, she did not criticize or comment. She simply nodded, taking in the space with a careful eye. "It's cozy," she said finally. "I think we can work well here." John was surprised by her words. Cozy was not a word he would usually use to describe his home. It was clean and functional, yes, but cozy. Somehow, her voice made it feel more than that. He gestured toward the kitchen table. "You can set up here," he said. Ayana unpacked a small bag she had brought. She carried a few utensils, some spices, and a notebook where she had written recipes she liked to use. She moved with an easy confidence, arranging things neatly and efficiently. John watched her silently. He was not used to having someone in his house, someone who would move around freely, taking charge in a way that felt natural. "I like to start with simple meals," she said, noticing his quiet observation. "Something fresh, easy to manage." "Then we can add more variety if you like." John nodded. He wasn't used to conversation while cooking, but he found himself listening. There was something soothing in the way she spoke. It was not loud or demanding. It was soft, measured, like she had thought carefully about every word before saying it. That evening, Ayana prepared her first meal. The smell of herbs, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread filled the house. John had not realized how much he had missed the warmth of a home-cooked meal. He watched as she moved around the kitchen with a quiet elegance, chopping, stirring, tasting, adjusting. Every movement seemed deliberate, confident, and precise. It was almost mesmerizing. When the meal was ready, John sat at the table, a little hesitant. He was not used to dining with company, even if that company was his cook. But as he tasted the food, he felt a surprise he hadn't expected. It was perfect. Simple, yes, but full of flavor, balanced and comforting. He looked up at Ayana, who was standing by the counter, watching quietly, ready to serve more if needed. "You like it?" she asked softly. "It's very good," John said honestly. "Better than I expected." She smiled, a small, quiet smile that did not demand attention but seemed to fill the room with warmth. "I'm glad," she said. "I enjoy cooking. I enjoy seeing someone appreciate it." Over the next few days, John noticed more about her. She had a way of moving through the kitchen that was calm and organized. She kept everything neat and clean, always putting things back in their place. She hummed softly while she worked, a gentle melody that seemed to make the house feel alive. And she laughed sometimes quietly, as if the sound was a secret she had chosen to share. John, who was so used to silence, found himself listening for it, almost unconsciously. He began to feel a small change in his routine. He looked forward to the smell of her cooking, to the sound of her voice as she described what she was preparing. He even started leaving small notes for her, reminders about meals he liked or ingredients he preferred. It was strange, he thought. Strange how a week could change something so familiar, something he had taken for granted. Ayanna, too, noticed John. She saw how he worked, how he spoke, how he moved through his quiet life. She did not judge him, did not push him to speak more than he wanted. But she respected the silence, understood it, and allowed it to coexist with her presence. There was a gentle rhythm in the way they shared the space, a rhythm that was comfortable and unspoken. One evening, John found himself in the kitchen earlier than usual. The sky outside was turning pink with sunset, and he noticed Ayanna stirring a pot quietly. The light fell across her face, highlighting her features, and for a moment he simply watched. He realized he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity, a desire to know her, to understand her. But he didn't know how to express it. He was reserved, cautious, not used to reaching out. Ayanna noticed him standing there, watching. She smiled softly, not in a teasing way, but with a quiet understanding. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost melodic, like it was meant to soothe. "Yes, please," John said, moving closer. They sat together at the kitchen table, the teacups warm in their hands. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was different now. It was not empty or cold. It was shared. It was something they were both part of, something that felt surprisingly natural. As the week went on, John realized that Ayanna had changed more than just the meals in his house. She had changed the atmosphere, the way he felt at home, the way he noticed the small details of life around him. The smell of fresh bread, the steam rising from a pot, the sound of a soft voice humming a tune, these things, once ordinary, had become moments he cherished. And Ayanna, for her part, seemed comfortable in the quiet rhythm of his life. She moved through the house with respect, bringing warmth without demanding attention, offering her presence without intruding. John had expected someone practical, someone to cook and leave. But Ayanna was different. She was patient, observant, and attentive, qualities that made her presence feel comforting rather than distracting. By the end of the week, John had formed a subtle bond with her. He still didn't speak much, still held onto his quiet nature, but he felt an unusual sense of anticipation when he saw her preparing a meal. Something about her presence had begun to fill the emptiness he had carried for years. He couldn't explain it yet, but he felt it in the small moments. The way she hummed while cooking, the careful way she arranged the table, the gentle way she acknowledged his presence without forcing conversation. The week ended quietly, with both of them settling into a routine. John returned to work, feeling lighter than before, while Ayanna continued to prepare meals that brought warmth and comfort to his home. Something had shifted in the household, a subtle change that neither had yet named. And though John remained reserved, he began to sense that life could be more than just routine and solitude. Something new had entered his life, something gentle, quiet, and unassuming, but powerful enough to make him notice the world in ways he hadn't for many years. And so, the first week passed, leaving both John and Ayanna aware of each other in a way that went beyond mere employment. There was a connection forming, quiet and unspoken, like the gentle start of a melody that would grow over time. Neither knew where it might lead, but both could feel that their lives, once solitary and predictable, were beginning to shift in ways that neither had anticipated. The days after Ayanna had settled in began to feel different for John. The house, once silent and still, now held a gentle rhythm that he had not realized he was missing. Each morning, he would wake to the soft sound of pots and pans, the faint smell of herbs and bread, and the quiet hum of someone moving comfortably through the space. At first he thought it was strange. He had grown used to his own silence, but soon it became comforting. Gianna had a way of organizing the kitchen that made everything seem effortless. Ingredients were neatly arranged on the counter, spices lined up in small jars, and the pantry was perfectly organized so that John could find anything he needed. Watching her work was like watching someone perform a quiet dance. Each step had a purpose, and there was a beauty in the order she brought to the room. John often found himself standing at the doorway, observing her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. He had never taken the time to notice these little details in life, but with her around, even small acts became fascinating. She started each day with simple meals: oatmeal with fresh fruit, eggs with herbs, or warm bread with honey. John had expected his mornings to be dull like they always had been, but Ayanna's meals made them something he looked forward to. Sometimes she would bring little surprises: a new type of tea, a slice of fruit he had never tried, or a simple dish she had learned from her family. John was careful not to show too much excitement, but inside he felt a growing warmth. These small gestures, seemingly ordinary, carried a sense of thoughtfulness that touched him deeply. One morning, as John sipped his tea, he noticed Ayanna arranging flowers in a small vase on the table. She had picked them from the garden outside, simple wildflowers with bright petals that seemed to smile in the morning light. John had never thought much about flowers, but seeing them brought a gentle brightness to the room. Gianna looked up and smiled at him. "It's nice to have something cheerful around," she said softly. Her voice had a quiet warmth that made ordinary words feel meaningful. John nodded, unsure of what to say. He was not used to this kind of conversation. Most people in his life, if there were any, had never paused to notice small details like flowers, smells, or sounds. Gianna did not seem to notice his awkwardness. She moved through her day with a calm and steady rhythm, never rushing, never demanding, yet somehow drawing his attention without effort. He felt a strange sense of comfort simply being in her presence, even if he said very little. As the week went on, John began to notice other things about her. She had a gentle curiosity about the world around her. She would ask questions about the town, the forest near his house, or the old traditions that he remembered from his own family. Her questions were never intrusive. They were thoughtful and genuine, showing a desire to understand rather than judge. John, who had long stopped talking about his past or his thoughts, found himself answering, sharing small pieces of his life he had not spoken aloud in years. It was a slow process, but he realized that her presence encouraged him to open up in ways he had not expected. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection. John would return from work to the smell of dinner cooking and the soft light that Ayanna preferred to use in the kitchen. Sometimes she would play gentle music from a small radio, or she would hum a tune while stirring a pot. The combination of warmth, smell, and sound made the house feel alive in a way it never had before. John would sit at the kitchen table, sipping water or tea, watching her move with quiet grace. He realized he was beginning to feel at home in a deeper way than just the physical space. Her presence brought a sense of calm and belonging he had almost forgotten. Gianna, for her part, seemed to notice John's quiet ways and respected them. She never forced conversation, and she gave him space when he needed it. But she also had a subtle way of drawing him into small interactions: a question about his day, a comment on a dish she was preparing, or a story from her own life. It was a gentle push, never overwhelming, and John found himself listening eagerly, waiting to hear what she would say next. One afternoon, as they were preparing a meal together, she began to tell him about her family back home. Her voice was calm but filled with vivid details. She spoke of her grandmother teaching her how to cook traditional dishes, of her younger siblings playing in the dusty yard, and of the stories her parents told her about their ancestors. John listened, captivated by the way she spoke. He had never thought much about family stories, but hearing hers made him feel connected to something larger than himself, something meaningful beyond the walls of his own house. John felt a stirring inside him he had not felt in years, a sense of curiosity, admiration, and a desire to understand more about her life. He realized that he was learning not just about her, but about himself. He had spent so long in solitude, thinking that silence was all he needed, but Ayana's presence showed him that quiet companionship could be just as fulfilling as solitude, and perhaps even more so. She also had a way of noticing details that John often overlooked. She would comment on the changing seasons, the way sunlight fell through the windows, or the way the trees outside swayed with the wind. At first, he didn't pay much attention, but over time he began to notice these things as well. Her awareness of the world around her encouraged him to slow down and appreciate the small moments of life that he had long ignored. Meals continued to improve with each passing day. Yana experimented with new flavors, combining traditional recipes with simple ingredients she found locally. John would taste, sometimes hesitant at first, but soon he began to trust her instincts completely. Each meal became a little celebration, a reminder that life could be full of small pleasures, even in a quiet house far from the busy town center. Their routine became comforting in a way neither had expected. Mornings started with light conversation and shared tea. Afternoons passed with quiet activity or small talk, and evenings ended with warm dinners and the soft glow of the kitchen lights. John began to feel a sense of anticipation when he saw her moving through the kitchen, a feeling he had not experienced in a long time. He was drawn to her presence, not in a way that was overwhelming or romantic, but in a way that made him feel alive again. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled softly in the distance and raindrops tapped against the windows, Ayana began humming a tune he hadn't heard before. The sound was soft and steady, blending with the rain in a way that made the entire house feel like a safe, warm haven from the storm outside. John sat quietly, listening. He felt a strange mixture of calm and wonder, realizing how much he had grown to appreciate her presence in such a short time. As the week drew to a close, John noticed subtle changes in himself. He smiled more often, even when alone. He found himself thinking about what meals Ayana might prepare next or how she might arrange the table. He even started to leave small notes for her, reminders of preferences or questions about flavors, a gesture that surprised him. He was not usually one to reach out, but her gentle influence had opened a small door in him, a door he had long kept closed. Ayana, too, had grown accustomed to his ways. She respected his quiet, reserved nature, and she adjusted her own energy to match his. She did not rush him, did not overwhelm him with words, but allowed their interactions to grow naturally. There was a balance in their relationship, a rhythm that was comforting and reassuring to both of them. By the end of the week, the small, quiet house felt different. It was still John's home, still a place of solitude in many ways, but it now held warmth, comfort, and a subtle sense of life that had been missing. John realized that the presence of someone like Ayana could change the atmosphere of a place, not through grand gestures or loud words, but through simple, thoughtful actions and a calm, steady presence. And so, the second week began with the house alive in its own quiet way. John continued his work and routine, but he returned home with a sense of anticipation, knowing that Ayana would be there, quietly preparing meals, humming softly, and bringing a subtle brightness to his days. Their bond, formed through shared silence, gentle conversation, and the simple act of preparing and enjoying meals together continued to deepen. The quiet rhythm of life in the small house became a shared language between them. Neither needed to speak constantly to understand the other. There was comfort in this unspoken connection, a sense that both had found someone who respected them, someone who made life a little brighter without changing its quiet nature. John began to understand that companionship did not always come with loud declarations or dramatic events. Sometimes it was the small things, the hum of a tune, the smell of fresh bread, the gentle arrangement of flowers, that spoke the loudest and mattered most. And so life continued in the house, simple yet full of warmth. Each day, each meal, and each quiet moment became a thread in the growing tapestry of their connection. John, once entirely reserved and closed off, found a gentle light returning to his life, a light sparked by the presence of someone who moved through the world with quiet grace, kindness, and thoughtfulness. As the days passed, John and Ayana's connection grew quietly but noticeably. It was subtle at first, in the small gestures and shared silences of the kitchen, but soon it began to take on a deeper meaning. John, who had always been reserved and cautious, started to feel a sense of trust he had long forgotten. He found himself talking more freely, sharing details about his life that he had never told anyone. And Ayana, with her patient presence and gentle curiosity, listened carefully, never judging, never interrupting, simply giving him space to speak in his own way. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky and cast golden light across the kitchen, Ayana began preparing dinner while John watched from the doorway. She was chopping vegetables with precise, practiced movements, the rhythm of her hands almost hypnotic. John had started to notice the little details about her, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the calm focus in her eyes, and the subtle grace in every motion. Something about her presence made him feel at ease, as though the weight of his usual solitude had lightened just a little. "You seem thoughtful today," Ayana said softly, not looking up from her work. John hesitated. He wasn't used to being observed so openly, but there was no judgment in her words, only gentle attention. "I suppose I am," he admitted quietly. "I've been thinking about life, I guess, about things I've done and things I haven't done." Ayana nodded, setting down the knife and wiping her hands. "Sometimes it helps to talk about it," she said simply. "Even small thoughts can feel lighter when shared." For a long moment, John did not respond. He had spent so many years keeping his feelings and experiences to himself that it was uncomfortable to voice them. But something in her calm demeanor encouraged him, and slowly, he began to speak. He told her about his childhood, about growing up in a quiet family, about the dreams he had once had, and the reasons he had let them go. He spoke of his work, the routines that had become almost like chains, and the loneliness that had crept into his life over the years. Yana listened with quiet attention, nodding occasionally, offering small words of encouragement. She did not interrupt or offer advice unless he asked for it, but her presence alone made him feel heard. John realized that he had not felt truly listened to in years. He had not shared his inner thoughts with anyone, and yet here was someone who accepted them without question, who made him feel that his words mattered. As he spoke, he noticed a subtle change in himself. The tightness in his chest that he had grown accustomed to began to ease. His shoulders, often tense from years of holding in his emotions, relaxed, and with every word he spoke, he felt a little more alive, a little more connected to the world outside his own mind. When he finally paused, Ayana smiled gently. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said. "It's not always easy to speak about these things. I'm honored that you trust me." John felt a warmth in his chest he could not easily explain. Trust was a rare thing for him, something he guarded closely, but now he realized that he had opened a door he had kept closed for many years. I appreciate your listening," he said softly, "more than I can say." After that evening, their conversations became more frequent. They were still quiet and respectful, never forced, but John began to feel comfortable sharing small pieces of his life each day. Yana, in turn, shared stories from her own past, stories of her family in the Navajo community, of traditions passed down through generations, and of the values that shaped her worldview. She spoke of her childhood with vivid detail: the sound of wind through the desert, the smell of sage burning during ceremonies, the laughter of siblings playing in the sunlight. Her words painted pictures that John had never experienced, and he listened with fascination, feeling as though he were glimpsing another world entirely. One evening, as the rain fell softly against the windows and the kitchen glowed with warm light, Ayana began talking about a special ritual her family practiced each year. She described the careful preparation, the songs, and the stories that were shared around the fire. John listened, captivated, asking questions gently, curious to understand more. He found himself imagining the scenes she described, feeling almost transported to a place he had never been. The stories were not just entertaining, they carried lessons, wisdom, and a quiet sense of reverence for life that resonated deeply with him. John began to realize how much he had missed sharing experiences with another person. He had spent so long in his own company, thinking that silence and solitude were enough. But Ayana's stories, her gentle presence, and her thoughtful attention showed him that companionship did not need to be loud or dramatic to be meaningful. It could be quiet, patient, and profound all at once. Ayana also noticed the changes in John. She saw the way his posture relaxed, the way his eyes would soften when he smiled, and the moments when he would speak with a little more openness than before. She did not comment directly, understanding that such transformations could not be rushed. But she felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her presence and patience were helping him rediscover parts of himself he had long forgotten. Their shared moments extended beyond conversation. Sometimes, they would sit together in the kitchen after meals, sipping tea in comfortable silence. John began to notice the subtle ways in which Ayana's presence filled the house, not just with sound and smell, but with a gentle energy that made the space feel warmer and more welcoming. He found himself looking forward to these moments, even if he did not always speak. The quiet companionship they shared became a comforting routine, a way for both of them to connect without words. One afternoon, as they were preparing a simple lunch, John asked Ayana about her life before coming to town. She hesitated for a moment, then began to speak about her experiences traveling, the different places she had seen, and the lessons she had learned along the way. Her stories were filled with small observations about people, culture, and the beauty of ordinary life. John listened intently, realizing that he had never taken the time to truly observe the world around him. Through her words, he began to see the small wonders in everyday life, the pattern of sunlight on the floor, the way the wind rustled leaves, the quiet satisfaction of preparing a meal. As the conversation unfolded, John shared his own reflections. He spoke of regrets, hopes, and the simple joys he had overlooked. He spoke not because he wanted advice, but because he felt that Ayana's presence made it safe to do so. And with each story shared, each memory recalled, he felt a little more connected, not just to her, but to life itself. Evenings became a time of reflection and gentle conversation. The routine of preparing meals together, sharing stories, and sitting in quiet companionship created a sense of harmony between them. John began to appreciate the balance of giving and receiving, of speaking and listening, of sharing space without overwhelming each other. It was a lesson in patience, empathy, and subtle human connection, one that he had long needed but never consciously sought. One night, as the sky turned deep blue and stars began to appear, Ayana told a story about a family tradition she cherished. She described a celebration in which her family would gather, share food, and tell stories that had been passed down for generations. John listened with fascination, imagining the warmth of the gathering, the laughter, and the sense of belonging. For the first time in many years, he felt a longing not for the past, but for a connection that was authentic, meaningful, and shared. He realized that he had begun to see Ayanna not just as a cook, but as a companion, someone whose presence brought light into the quiet corners of his life. He did not yet fully understand the depth of his feelings, nor did he need to. What mattered was the trust, the mutual respect, and the gentle understanding that had grown between them. By the end of this week, a subtle but profound transformation had taken place. John's home was no longer just a place of routine and solitude. It had become a space of warmth, connection, and gentle discovery. Ayanna's stories, presence, and attentiveness had opened a door within him, allowing him to see life in a new light. He began to realize that connection, real human connection, did not have to be loud, dramatic, or overwhelming. It could be quiet, patient, and tender, yet just as powerful. And so life continued in the small house, marked by shared meals, quiet conversation, and the gentle rhythm of companionship. John, once entirely reserved, began to experience the world through new eyes, eyes that noticed the small joys, the simple pleasures, and the quiet beauty of life. And Ayanna, with her calm presence and thoughtful stories, continued to guide him gently, not with force or instruction, but with patience, kindness, and the quiet power of understanding. In those moments, neither spoke of the future or of what might come. They simply existed together, sharing the ordinary yet extraordinary moments of life. And in doing so, they discovered a truth that was simple yet profound. That connection, understanding, and trust could grow quietly, steadily, and beautifully, like a gentle river carving its path through time. As the weeks passed, John and Ayanna's quiet companionship grew stronger. The house, once only a space of solitude, had become a place of warmth and gentle life. Their days were filled with simple routines, preparing meals, sharing tea, and exchanging small stories about the world outside their little haven. John had never expected that hiring a cook could change so much. But Ayanna's presence had brought more than just good food. It had brought comfort, understanding, and a subtle joy he hadn't felt in years. Yet life, as it often does, has a way of reminding us that even the most peaceful moments can be complicated. One afternoon, while John was at work, Ayanna received a phone call. He did not hear the conversation, but he noticed her expression when she hung up. Her brow was slightly furrowed, and her usually calm eyes seemed distant, almost troubled. John had never seen her like that before. She was usually composed, quiet, and steady. This momentary change unsettled him, though he could not yet understand why. When John returned home that evening, he found Ayanna in the kitchen, preparing dinner as usual, but there was a softness in her movements that wasn't there before. She smiled at him, as she always did, but her eyes betrayed a shadow of concern. "Is everything okay?" John asked gently, approaching her. Ayanna paused, taking a deep breath. "There's something I need to handle," she said carefully. "A family matter far away. It's important and I may need to go for a short while." John nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. He had expected that she might have personal matters, of course, but the thought of her leaving, even briefly, made him realize just how much her presence had come to mean to him. The house would feel emptier, quieter, and he was not certain he was ready for that change. "I understand," he said finally, keeping his voice calm. "Take whatever time you need. Family always comes first." Ayanna smiled faintly, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you," she said softly. "I hope it won't be too long. I promise I'll return as soon as I can." Even after she returned to her room, John felt a quiet tension he had not experienced before. He went about his usual routine, but his mind kept wandering to the thought of her absence. He realized he had grown dependent, not on her work alone, but on the sense of life and warmth she brought to his home. The house seemed unusually silent that night, even though she was still there. He had not thought that companionship could feel so essential, but now he understood how much he valued it. The next morning, Yana shared a few details with him. Her family in her hometown was facing a situation that required her help, a small, personal matter, not dangerous but important. She explained it briefly, with the same calm tone she always used, but there was an underlying tension in her voice. John listened attentively, offering quiet support. "If you need anything," he said, "I can help however I can." Yana's eyes softened. "I appreciate that," she said. "It means a lot to know you care." John was surprised by his own feelings. He realized that he did care deeply, not just as an employer but as someone who valued her presence and her friendship. It was a new and unfamiliar feeling, an awareness that life could feel richer when shared, that bonds could form quietly, without drama or grand gestures. Over the next few days, John noticed Yana becoming more thoughtful and slightly distracted. She continued her work, preparing meals with the same care and attention as before, but there were moments when she would pause, staring into the distance, lost in thought. John did not ask prying questions. He simply offered small gestures of support, a warm tea, a smile, a quiet word of reassurance. He began to understand that sometimes presence and patience mattered more than words. One afternoon, as they were washing dishes together, Yana spoke about her family. She shared stories of her younger siblings, of the values her parents had taught her, and of her hopes for their future. Her voice carried a mixture of affection and concern. John listened quietly, realizing that these stories revealed not just her past but the depth of her character. She was someone who loved deeply, who cared not only for the people in her life, but also for the traditions and values that shaped her identity. John found himself reflecting on his own life. He thought about the people he had cared for in the past, the friendships that had faded, and the quiet loneliness he had accepted for so long. He realized that he had been closed off, not out of dislike, but out of habit and fear of disruption. Yana's presence challenged that habit, gently showing him that life could be shared without losing oneself. That evening, as rain softly tapped against the windows and the kitchen glowed with warm light, Yana shared a story that struck John deeply. She spoke of a time when her family faced hardship and how they had come together to support each other. She described the resilience, the patience, and the quiet determination that had allowed them to overcome difficulties. John listened, captivated. He saw parallels in his own life, the ways he had faced challenges alone, the strength he had gained, but also the isolation he had endured. "I admire how your family supports each other," John said quietly. "I've spent so long managing everything on my own. I suppose I've forgotten what it feels like to rely on someone or to be relied upon." Yana smiled gently. "There's strength in independence," she said softly, "but there's also strength in sharing life with others. Neither is better or worse. They simply balance each other." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. Her insight, delivered without judgment, resonated deeply with him. He realized that he had been learning not only from her presence but from her perspective, her understanding of life, and her quiet wisdom. As the week progressed, John noticed himself becoming more attentive to Yana's moods, her gestures, and her subtle expressions. He had not realized how much he valued her companionship until he sensed the possibility of her absence. And yet he did not let his worry overwhelm him. Instead, he offered steady support, a quiet reassurance that she could rely on him. In return, Yana continued to move through the house with her usual calm confidence, her presence a reminder that even amidst challenges, life could remain warm and meaningful. One evening, John and Yana sat together by the window, watching the sun set over the trees outside. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air carried the soft scent of rain. They spoke little, simply sharing the quiet beauty of the moment. For John, it was a revelation that peace and connection could coexist with uncertainty, that companionship could bring comfort even when life presented challenges. Ayanna, too, seemed reflective. She spoke softly about the importance of balance, between work and family, between independence and reliance, between silence and communication. John listened, absorbing her words, realizing that they applied not only to her life but to his own. He had spent so long in solitude, believing it to be necessary, when in reality it had been a limitation. Her presence had shown him that life could be both independent and shared, quiet yet full of meaning. As the week came to a close, Ayanna prepared to leave briefly to attend to her family matter. John helped her pack, offering quiet words of encouragement and support. "Take your time," he said gently. "I'll be here when you return." Ayanna smiled, her eyes reflecting gratitude and relief. "Thank you, John," she said softly. "It means more than I can express." When she left, John felt a momentary emptiness in the house, but it was not as heavy as he feared. He had learned to appreciate the subtle presence she brought to his life, to respect the space they shared, and to recognize the quiet bond that had formed between them. Her absence reminded him of the value of connection, the strength in patience, and the comfort in knowing that someone cares. During her absence, John continued his routines, but he noticed the small ways in which he missed her presence, the hum of her voice, the careful movements in the kitchen, the warmth that seemed to linger in the air when she was near. He realized that companionship, even when quiet and understated, had a profound impact on life. It was not about drama or loud gestures. It was about consistency, care, and mutual understanding. By the time Ayanna returned, John felt a quiet anticipation. The house, though still, had been waiting for her. When she stepped through the door, carrying a small bag and a tired but genuine smile, he felt a sense of relief and joy he could not have anticipated. The brief absence had shown him just how much her presence mattered, how deeply he valued the life they had begun to share. Their reunion was quiet, without grand gestures, but full of warmth. Ayanna moved through the house with her usual calm confidence, and John found himself smiling more freely, speaking with a little more openness, and appreciating the small, meaningful moments of life. The challenges of the past week had strengthened their connection, revealing the depth of trust and mutual respect that had quietly grown between them. By the end of this chapter in their lives, John had learned a valuable lesson, that life's challenges, whether small or significant, do not diminish the value of companionship. Instead, they reveal it. Through patience, understanding, and quiet support, bonds can deepen, trust can grow, and life can become richer and more meaningful. Ayanna's presence had transformed his world, not through grand gestures but through steady, thoughtful, and caring companionship. And in that quiet house, filled with the soft warmth of shared routines, John began to understand that life, even in its complexities and unexpected challenges, could be beautiful when shared with someone who truly cares. When Ayanna returned from attending to her family matters, John felt an unfamiliar warmth as he opened the door to greet her. She smiled, though there was a hint of fatigue in her eyes, and for a moment, John noticed how much he had missed her presence in the house. The emptiness he had felt while she was away had been subtle but undeniable, a quiet reminder of the value of companionship. And now, seeing her again, he realized that her presence had quietly become a part of his daily life in ways he had never imagined. "Welcome back," John said softly, stepping aside to let her in. "Thank you, John," Ayanna replied. Her voice carried relief and a quiet happiness. She placed her bag down and began unpacking a few things she had brought back from her trip. It was a simple gesture, yet it felt symbolic. Life had returned to its familiar rhythm, and yet something had shifted. Over the next few days, they settled back into their routine, but there was a new depth to it. John noticed the little ways she moved through the house, arranging the kitchen, preparing meals and humming quietly while she worked. Her presence was both familiar and comforting, but now it carried an added layer of meaning. John felt more aware of the life they shared, more appreciative of the gentle harmony they had created together. One morning, while Ayanna was preparing breakfast, John decided to ask about her experience during her time away. "How was your family?" he asked quietly, unsure if he was intruding. Ayanna paused for a moment, considering her words. "It was meaningful," she said softly. "I was able to help, and it reminded me of how important family and support are. But I also realized how much I've come to value the life here, the small routines, and the connections we share." John listened carefully. There was something about the way she spoke that felt sincere, almost like a gentle reflection of his own feelings. He realized that she, too, had grown attached, not just to her surroundings, but to the quiet companionship they had built together. As the day went on, John began to notice the subtleties of their bond even more. It wasn't just in the conversations they shared, though those had become more open and natural. It was in the small gestures. The way Ayanna would leave a freshly baked loaf of bread on the counter, the way John would pour her tea just the way she liked it, the quiet understanding that existed between them without the need for words. These moments, though simple, carried a depth of meaning that both of them felt, even if they never spoke it aloud. One evening, as the sun set and the kitchen glowed in soft orange light, they sat together at the table, sipping tea. John realized how much he had changed over the past weeks. He had been a man who valued solitude, who had built walls around himself to protect his heart from disappointment. Yet, through Ayanna's gentle presence, patience, and quiet kindness, those walls had begun to crumble. He had learned to trust again, to share, and to notice the small joys that life offered. "I never expected this," John said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I never thought that having someone here, even for simple routines, could change so much." Ayanna looked at him with a soft smile. "Change can be subtle," she said. "It doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes the smallest things, sharing meals, stories, quiet moments, can change a life more than we realize." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He thought back to the days when the house had been quiet and empty, when he had walked through life without noticing the small wonders around him. Now he felt a sense of fullness, of life that was both calm and rich, simple yet profound. The following days were filled with small, meaningful moments. John and Ayanna worked together in the kitchen, preparing meals with care and attention. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet reflection. John noticed how naturally they had learned to read each other's moods and needs, offering comfort and support without forcing conversation or attention. There was a harmony to their companionship, a balance that neither had expected but both deeply appreciated. One afternoon, John decided to take a walk with Ayanna in the small wooded area near his house. The trees were tall and green, and the sunlight filtered softly through the leaves. It was a place he had visited many times alone, but now, walking with someone beside him, it felt different, full of life, conversation, and shared observation. They spoke of the changing seasons, the colors of the sky, and the patterns of nature. John noticed how Ayanna's eyes lit up when she described the subtle details she observed, and he realized how much he enjoyed seeing the world through her perspective. "Life feels fuller when shared," John said quietly, more to himself than to her. Ayanna smiled softly. "It does," she said. "Sharing doesn't take away from our individuality. It adds to it gently without taking anything away." John reflected on her words. He realized how much he had learned about balance, patience, and understanding, not through grand lessons, but through simple experiences shared day by day. The quiet acts of caring, listening, and presence had taught him more than he could have imagined. As the weeks went on, their bond deepened. John found himself planning small surprises for Ayanna, a special ingredient he thought she would enjoy, a new tea he had purchased, or a small bouquet of wildflowers. She, in turn, would leave little notes with her thoughts, small additions to meals, or an extra effort in arranging the house. These gestures were not extravagant, but they carried a richness that reflected the care and respect they had developed for each other. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Ayanna shared another story from her childhood, about a lesson her grandmother had taught her regarding patience and kindness. John listened intently, realizing that these lessons were not only meaningful in her life, but also applicable to his own. He thought about the ways he had grown over the past few weeks, the openness, the trust, the newfound appreciation for shared life. He realized that Ayanna had helped him rediscover parts of himself he had long forgotten. Later that night, after dinner, they sat together in quiet reflection. The house was calm, the lights soft, and the air carried the faint aroma of the meal they had just prepared. John felt a sense of gratitude he could not fully express in words. It was a gratitude not only for her presence but for the subtle transformation in his own heart. He had learned to open himself, to notice, to appreciate, and to trust. Ayanna noticed his contemplative mood and reached out gently, placing a hand on his arm. "You've grown," she said softly, a hint of warmth in her voice. Not in a loud or obvious way, but in the ways that matter most. You notice more, feel more, and trust more. "You've changed quietly but profoundly." John felt a quiet smile spread across his face. "I suppose I have," he admitted, "and it's because of you." Ayanna shook her head gently. "It's because of both of us," she said, "because we chose to share, to listen, and to be present. Change happens when we allow it gently, day by day." The following weeks continued in a steady rhythm, but now it was infused with a new sense of purpose and connection. They worked, laughed, shared stories, and cared for each other in ways that were subtle yet meaningful. The house, once quiet and solitary, now hummed with life, not noisy or dramatic, but warm, consistent, and fulfilling. John realized that his days, once predictable and uneventful, now held anticipation, curiosity, and joy. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch and watching the sun dip toward the horizon, John reflected on the journey he had experienced. Ayanna had entered his life quietly, without fanfare, but her presence had brought profound change. He had learned that companionship did not require grand gestures, dramatic events, or constant words. It could grow from patience, mutual respect, shared routines, and quiet understanding. Ayanna noticed his reflection and smiled. "You've learned something valuable," she said softly. "Life is richer when we allow ourselves to connect, to trust, and to share even in small ways." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He had spent so long in solitude, believing it to be necessary, when in reality it had been limiting. Through her guidance, gentle, patient, and steady, he had rediscovered the joys of connection, the strength in trust, and the quiet fulfillment that comes from shared life. In the months that followed, John and Ayanna continued their quiet companionship, each day deepening their understanding of each other and themselves. Meals, conversations, walks, and small gestures became the threads of a life woven together gently but firmly. John had transformed from a man who valued solitude above all else to someone who understood the profound beauty of connection, compassion, and shared moments. And in this quiet house, filled with warmth, light, and subtle life, John realized that happiness does not always arrive with grand gestures or dramatic events. Sometimes it enters gently, carried on the quiet presence of someone who cares, someone who listens, and someone who walks beside you, day by day, story by story, meal by meal. By the end of the story, John and Ayanna had created more than just a routine or a household. They had created a life of balance, trust, and gentle companionship. Their bond was not loud or obvious to anyone outside the house, but it was real, meaningful, and transformative. Through patience, understanding, and simple acts of care, they had learned the quiet power of connection, and in doing so had discovered a life richer than either had imagined. And so, the house remained alive with warmth and harmony. John, once a reserved and solitary man, had found not only a friend in Ayanna, but also a renewed sense of self. Ayanna, in turn, had found a place where she could be fully herself, sharing her presence, wisdom, and warmth with someone who truly appreciated it. Together, they had learned that life's greatest treasures are often found in the quiet, unassuming moments shared with another heart willing to walk beside you.